Here's a gentle and thoughtful hook to begin your speech in the Mr. Rogers style. Have you ever wondered how a quiet border between two lands can suddenly become the center of a storm? How misunderstandings, fear, and power can lead to something as heavy as war? Today, I want to tell you a story not just of soldiers and maps but of choices, consequences, and the people who lived through the First Anglo-Burmese War. Because even in the pages of history, we find lessons that still speak to us today. In the early 19th century, the Kingdom of Burma, under the Konbaung Dynasty, was expanding its territory aggressively. It had recently taken control of regions such as Arakan, Manipur, and Assam that were either close to or directly bordering British-held territories in India. This expansion was not just a matter of land, but also about political influence and power projection in the region. Burma's annexation of Assam and its intervention in neighboring states created anxiety for the British East India Company, which had its own ambitions of consolidating and expanding its control in South Asia. The British were especially concerned because Assam and the surrounding hill states were seen as buffer zones protecting their northeastern frontiers. As Burmese forces pushed closer to Bengal, the British began to view this as a direct threat to their security. Tensions continued to rise due to a series of border disputes, skirmishes, and conflicting territorial claims. Particularly in the regions of Kaka and Jansha, both of these small kingdoms had ties with the British, and when Burmese forces tried to assert influence there, it provoked strong reactions. Additionally, the British were suspicious of Burmese intentions in the northeastern states and were eager to curb any further expansion before it could endanger British rule in India. These circumstances created a volatile atmosphere where diplomacy began to fail. Each side grew more distrustful of the other. Small incidents on the borders began to escalate, and both nations started preparing for a larger confrontation. While neither side declared war immediately, the actions taken in this period, both military and political, made a clash almost inevitable. The build-up was not just about land, but also about influence, prestige, and the desire to control key strategic regions in the east. In March 1824, the long-standing tensions between the British East India Company and the Burmese Empire erupted into open conflict. The British, growing increasingly alarmed by Burmese advances into Assam and Manipur, saw these incursions as not only violations of territory, but also as direct threats to their control in northeast India. The Burmese, on the other hand, viewed these regions as part of their sphere of influence and were determined to retain control over them. These conflicting ambitions left little room for peaceful negotiation. British officials, particularly Lord Amherst, Governor-General of India, decided that military action was necessary to curb Burmese aggression and secure British frontiers. The formal outbreak of war began when Burmese forces entered Kaka, a British-protected territory. In response, the British declared war and began military operations. This marked the start of the First Anglo-Burmese War, one of the most expensive and difficult wars fought by the British in the region. The war began with multiple fronts, including operations in northeast India, where British troops engaged Burmese units in Assam and Arakan. However, the most decisive move came from the British naval expedition that sailed to the Burmese coast. A British force consisting of around 10,000 men landed in Rangoon, expecting to face stiff resistance, but found the city largely abandoned. Although they captured it without much fighting, they were immediately faced with logistical challenges, a lack of supplies, and disease. The Burmese, unfamiliar with European-style warfare but skilled in guerrilla tactics and using the terrain to their advantage, continued to resist through small but persistent attacks. The British, expecting a quick victory, soon realized that this war would be long, costly, and far more complex than initially believed. What began as a swift punitive mission became a drawn-out campaign that would reshape the region. When British forces landed in Rangoon in May 1824, they expected a swift campaign that would pressure the Burmese into surrender. However, they were unprepared for the environmental and logistical challenges that awaited them. The tropical climate was harsh and unfamiliar, with heavy rains, dense jungles, and high humidity, creating a difficult setting for the soldiers, many of whom were from Europe and unaccustomed to such conditions. Disease quickly became one of the deadliest enemies. Malaria, dysentery, and cholera spread rapidly among the troops, causing more casualties than actual combat. Supplies, which were expected to arrive regularly by sea, were often delayed or insufficient, leading to shortages of food, clean water, and medical care. The terrain posed further difficulties. Much of Lower Burma was covered in swamps, thick forests, and winding rivers. British soldiers had to move heavy artillery and equipment through muddy roads and flooded areas. Slowing down their progress, the Burmese army, while lacking modern weaponry, made effective use of their knowledge of the land. They used guerrilla tactics, ambushing British patrols and attacking supply lines. Their mobility and resilience frustrated British efforts to gain quick control over the region. In Rangoon, which was captured with little resistance, the British found the city largely deserted and stripped of resources by the retreating Burmese, leaving them with no local infrastructure to support their occupation. The monsoon season added to the misery, turning roads into rivers and campgrounds into breeding grounds for insects and disease. Morale among the British troops dropped, and desertions increased. Officers struggled to maintain discipline and coordinate attacks. Despite their superior firepower and naval support, the British quickly understood that the war would not be won through traditional battle tactics alone, but would require enduring severe environmental hardships. Several key battles defined the course of the First Anglo-Burmese War, shaping its outcome and revealing the strengths and weaknesses of both sides. One of the first major engagements took place near Rangoon, shortly after the British had occupied the city. Though initially abandoned by the Burmese, they soon regrouped and launched a series of counterattacks to reclaim it. These battles were intense and often fought in difficult terrain, with British forces defending their position while trying to adapt to the Burmese style of warfare. The Burmese soldiers were skilled in using the forests and river systems to move swiftly and strike unexpectedly, often under the cover of night or heavy vegetation. In contrast, the British forces relied on disciplined formations, heavy artillery, and naval support to hold their ground and push forward. One of the turning points came during the Battle of Prome in late 1825. Prome was a strategically important town along the Irrawaddy River, and its capture was vital for the British advance toward the Burmese heartland. The British, under General Sir Archibald Campbell, launched a well-coordinated attack that overwhelmed the Burmese defences. Despite their determination, the Burmese forces suffered heavy losses and were forced to retreat. This victory not only boosted British morale, but also crippled Burmese hopes of reclaiming lost territory. Meanwhile, in the northeastern front, British-led Indian forces engaged Burmese troops in Assam and Manipur. These operations aimed to break Burmese control over their western provinces. The recapture of these regions was gradual and difficult, but eventually successful. The Burmese, though brave and persistent, were worn down by the sustained pressure from multiple fronts. Their traditional combat techniques and lack of modern weaponry made it difficult to resist the organized and better-equipped British campaigns. These key battles highlighted the contrast between European military structure and indigenous resistance. The Treaty of Yandabo, signed on February 24, 1826, marked the official end of the First Anglo-Burmese War. After nearly 2 years of intense conflict, both sides were exhausted. But it was Burma that had been pushed into a corner. Continuous defeats, the fall of key territories, and internal instability forced the Burmese court to seek peace. British forces had advanced far enough into central Burma to pose a direct threat to the capital. Ava, recognizing the danger, the Burmese king agreed to negotiate. The resulting treaty was heavily in favor of the British and imposed severe conditions on Burma. Under its terms, Burma had to cede vast and strategically significant territories, including Arakan, Assam, Manipur, and These regions had not only symbolic and economic value, but also served as critical buffer zones that had protected Burma from outside influence. Their loss dramatically shrank the kingdom's sphere of influence and weakened its borders. In addition to the territorial losses, Burma was required to pay an enormous war indemnity of £1 million, a sum that severely strained the kingdom's already depleted treasury. The first payment was to be made immediately, with the remaining balance settled in installments. Burma also had to accept the presence of a British resident at its royal court, a requirement that symbolized a loss of political independence and invited future interference. Furthermore, the treaty restricted Burma from engaging in alliances or interventions with neighboring states like Kakar and Jaintia, which were now under British protection. While the treaty brought an end to open hostilities, it left Burma politically and economically crippled. For the British, it was a strategic and territorial victory that expanded their influence into Southeast Asia. The treaty laid the groundwork for deeper colonial control in the decades to follow. The First Anglo-Burmese War left a lasting legacy that deeply impacted the future of Burma and shaped British colonial ambitions in Southeast Asia. For Burma, the war was not only a military defeat, but also a national tragedy that marked the beginning of its decline as an independent kingdom. The loss of key territories such as Arakan Assam, Manipur, and Tenasserim greatly reduced its political influence and economic resources. These regions had been important for trade, military defense, and agricultural production. With their loss, Burma's ability to maintain regional dominance was shattered. The financial burden imposed by the war indemnity strained the Burmese economy for years, weakening the kingdom's administrative functions and increasing internal unrest. The psychological impact on the Burmese monarchy was significant. Defeat damaged the prestige of the Konbaung Dynasty, shaking public confidence and sparking dissatisfaction among the nobility and military. The forced presence of a British resident at the royal court further symbolized the profanity and created constant tension between traditional Burmese authority and foreign influence. For the British, the war was seen as a difficult but ultimately successful campaign. Although it had been extremely costly in terms of lives and money, it resulted in the expansion of British India's northeastern frontier and secured control over new territories, rich in resources and trade opportunities. It also marked the beginning of deeper British involvement in Burmese affairs. The political vacuum and instability left in Burma made it more vulnerable to further British interventions. This war set the precedent for the Second Anglo-Burmese War in 1852 and the Third in 1885, which would eventually lead to the complete annexation of Burma into the British Empire. The First Anglo-Burmese War was thus the starting point of a long period of colonial domination that would reshape Burma's identity, governance, and relationship with the outside world. Here's a gentle and thoughtful hook to begin your speech in the Mr. Rogers style. Have you ever wondered how a quiet border between two lands can suddenly become the center of a storm? How misunderstandings, fear, and power can lead to something as heavy as war? Today, I want to tell you a story, not just of soldiers and maps, but of choices, consequences, and the people who lived through the First Anglo-Burmese War. Because, even in the pages of history, we find lessons that still speak to us today. Asterisk.